You may not have seen one of these just yet, but there's a pretty good chance that you'll see them absolutely everywhere. This is the 2025 Toyota Camry, and Toyota calls this a new generation car, but in reality that's kind of a half-truth. It is thoroughly updated from the old model, but there's still some carryover parts, as well as some new bits. So I'm going to walk you through what's new, what's old, what's good, and what's not so good about the new Camry. So let's jump in and check it out. The Camry adopts Toyota's new hammerhead design language, and we first saw that on the CHR SUV. So that means that the face is now much squarer. The bonnet is new and it's far more chiseled than before, and it's joined by new slimline LED headlights with LED running lights, and on high-spec versions you get LED fog lights. The bumper overall is much squarer and more slimline than it was previously, and the whole look is a lot cleaner and a lot sharper than it used to be. Interestingly, one of the styling elements that they haven't changed is what I consider one of the Camry's clumsiest design motifs, and it's the windscreen pillar. They're narrower at the bottom than they are at the top, which is almost the inverse of what you get on any other car. And it's always looked a little bit strange to me. So despite the new front end, it still flows into a roofline and a pillar that you've seen before. At the side of the car, there are some styling revisions, but again, not a lot for a car that is meant to be new generation. You'll notice new alloy wheel designs. They're 17-inch on Ascent and Ascent Sport, and 18s on the SL that we have here. Toyota's also revised its badging, and I know that sounds little, but the old Hybrid Synergy Drive badges that you used to get have been replaced by HEV badges, so Toyota's kind of abandoned its old branding. Front doors are carried over. This is the same as what you got on the previous model Camry, but in a move that's somewhat interesting, the rear doors are part new. The lower half is a carryover as well, but at the back they've redesigned the window and the window line. So you've now got a little vent behind the door and a square edge, but in doing so, they've made the roof line lower. So this section used to finish with a point and it doesn't anymore. That has an impact, and I'll tell you about that a little bit later. At the rear, the windscreen is a carryover part as well. The boot lid, even though it doesn't look very different, is slightly refined, so it has a more prominent lip at the trailing edge of the boot. There's been some revisions to the badging, and just like the headlights, the taillights have gotten wider and slimmer, so they're a little bit more in that hammerhead theme of the new design language. And the rear bumper has been tidied up, so it's now a lot squarer than it used to be. And you might remember that old high-grade Camrys had kind of a rear diffuser and exposed tailpipes. They're gone now. Every grade gets the same rear bumper with a matte black plastic lower and hidden exhaust pipes. If you're a fan of the way the new Camry looks, give that like button a tap. But if you don't like it, let me know in the comments. Tell me what you think would be better or what Toyota could change to make the Camry a little bit more suited to your tastes. The 2025 Toyota Camry range is now hybrid only, with the previous base model petrol variant scrapped. There are 3 variants in the range: the fleet-friendly Ascent, the mid-grade Ascent Sport, and the luxurious SL range topper, which is the car I'm going to show you through today. The Camry is the first model in Australia with Toyota's 5th generation hybrid system. The 2.5 litre naturally aspirated engine carries over from before and is a little more powerful, but the electric side is new with a more powerful electric motor. The end result is a combined 170 kilowatt output, up 10 kilowatts over the old hybrid Camry, and fuel consumption is rated at 4 litres per 100 kilometres. Previously, the Camry Hybrid was rated at 4.2 to 4.5 litres per 100 kilometres depending on the variant. The new Camry Ascent is likely to be the first choice for fleets and rideshare operators, and pricing now starts from $39,990 plus on-road costs. Standard equipment includes fabric seat trim, manual seat adjustment, dual-zone climate control, a urethane steering wheel, push-button start, a 7-inch driver's display, an 8-inch infotainment screen, and 5 USB ports throughout the interior. On the outside, there's 17-inch alloy wheels, LED head and tail lights, and a heap of safety tech I'll tell you about a little later on. Moving up to the Ascent Sport will cost you $42,990 plus on-road costs, and for that you'll get high-grade LED headlights, LED fog lights, a leather steering wheel, powered driver's seat, wireless phone charger, and a bigger 12.3-inch infotainment system. The flagship SL grade costs $53,990 before on-road costs, but the spec list pads out with 18-inch wheels, rear privacy tint, a panoramic sunroof, leather seat trim, front seat heating and cooling, a powered passenger seat, powered steering column adjustment, heated steering wheel, driver's head-up display, a 9-speaker JBL stereo, and a 12.3-inch digital instrument cluster. That's a big upgrade, but for an 11 grand step up from the model below it, it would want to be. Toyota has scrapped the in-between SX model that used to fill that space in line with buyer demand. Now, if you're after a medium sedan like this, you can get a Mazda 6 from around $36,000 to $54,000, but there's no hybrid available. A Honda Accord only comes in a single hybrid model, but it's almost $65,000 drive away. And then you have cars like the all-electric BYD Seal, starting from just under $50,000 plus on-road costs. But no matter what car you're looking at, you can find it at drive.com.au/marketplace and search listings for new and near new cars from our trusted dealer partners around the country. A lot of work has gone into overhauling the interior of the Camry. And again, while it might not look revolutionary and completely different, a lot of familiar themes, but a lot of improvements along the way. So the dash design is now more horizontal than before, and the idea behind that is to kind of emphasize width. But the benefit of that is that things like the integration of climate controls and screens look a lot better than they used to. And if you remember the old Camry, or if you've been in one before, had that kind of wonky offset Y-shaped center console that made no sense whatsoever. So the new design is a lot cleaner and a lot more straight lined and square angled to kind of tidy things up. The dash has been reconfigured, so you get these horizontal strakes in front of the passenger. A little bit weird, and they're in a gloss black, so I tend to find they pick up a lot of reflections, but maybe that's just me. There's an 8-inch display in the base model car, or a 12.3-inch infotainment in the mid and top spec, and you get a 7-inch display in the base and mid spec ahead of the driver, but 12.3 inches in this top spec SL. Every Camry in the range gets dual zone climate control, but you get some extra functions in the SL, like heated and cooled seats and a heated steering wheel. This center console has been completely reconfigured, and it's a lot smarter than it used to be. If you remember the old slide-away wireless charge pad, it's gone now. So there's a big storage area here, open cup holders and a spot for your wallet and keys, and a wireless charge pad here. Interestingly, Toyota hasn't gone for the little stubby hybrid shifter that other hybrid models get. It retains a traditional gear lever. Whether you like that or not is up to you. There is, of course, a big center console, and it's, a fairly decent storage area. The seats have been redesigned, or the padding has been redesigned. Realistically, it doesn't make a world of difference, right? They're still quite broad and they're pretty comfy. They're not the softest seat in the world, and yet I have found that I haven't felt uncomfortable in them at all. The SL gets powered driver and passenger seats, and it gets leather trim, and weirdly, it gets like just this tiny little bit of Alcantara on the top corners of the seats. The rest of it is, well, they call it leather accented, so it's a mix of fake and real leather. When you go down to the base models, you get fabric trim. The very, very base model gets manual seats and a urethane steering wheel. But then in the middle, splitting the difference, the Ascent Sport, which is the mid-grade model, gets a leather wheel, a powered driver's seat, and cloth trim. The infotainment display on Ascent Sport and SL is super wide, so 12.3 inches, but it's really quite a letterbox display. It comes with things like navigation, digital radio plus AM and FM. It's all pretty easy and intuitive. This is a system that Toyota has adopted almost across its entire range now. There's a couple of models that still don't have it, but it's a big step up for the Camry. It, of course, includes CarPlay, and that's now wireless, plus Android Auto, wireless as well. It's pretty snappy, it's responsive to touch inputs and things like that, but probably my favorite feature about the whole infotainment system is that the climate controls aren't in it. They retain their own control panel here. It's pretty easy to use, and after you've driven the car for a while, you'll be able to do the muscle memory thing and you don't even need to look at the buttons. Vents are down low, but I don't mind that actually, because it means that you don't end up with one frozen hand, and because this is Toyota aircon, it is icy cold. And overall, this interior is as spacious as it was before. So all the key dimensions are pretty much like they were in the previous generation Camry, but it's the refinement and detail that has improved on just about everything that you look at and touch. Now, remember when I talked about the design and I said there was a problem? It's this. That is really low, and you're going to scon yourself 100 times before you remember that that is a permanent problem. And it's a problem that's been introduced on this generation of Camry. It wasn't in the old one. The door opening was actually a little bit higher. Other than that though, things like the front carry over largely unchanged in terms of dimensions. There's still a lot of space in here. I hit my head really hard.
Yeah.
As a bit of a barometer, I'm not particularly tall. I'm 169 centimetres. That driver's seat is set to where I have it, and I, am nowhere near the seat in front. So there's plenty of knee room and plenty of leg room. If the seat is further back, you can get your toes under the front seats. So it's actually a pretty comfortable place to be. The back seat doesn't have a lot of amenities. Being the SL grade, this one has absolutely everything you can get. And there's still not much. There are vents at the back of the center console, plus 2 USB-C ports. You get a pair of map pockets in the back of the seat backs and bottle holders in the doors. In the SL grade, you get adjustable headrests, but in the lower spec cars, they're fixed in place. As the driver, you can knock these out of the way to see more clearly when you don't have passengers, but you can't do that in the base grades. Other than that, you get a pull-down center armrest, but I find it a bit weird. It just kind of flops. It doesn't have any resistance to the hinge. There's 2 cup holders in there, and when it's set in place, it's actually a touch too low. If it sat up, it'd be a little bit more useful. So as much as they've kind of amped the luxury of the SL variant, it's a little bit, Camry-esque in what it offers. The only other difference that you get in the SL versus the other variants is the panoramic roof, and it is huge, and it lets a ton of light into the cabin, and for backseat passengers, it gives a really cool overhead view when you're on the road. Probably one of the crucial factors for a car like this is the boot, and at 524 litres, it hasn't changed from the previous Camry. Dimensions are exactly the same. Now, weirdly, the boot opener isn't in the middle, it's over here, and the boot isn't powered, but it has a strong enough spring that it'll open itself. So you can pop it from inside the car or from the key, and on approach, the boot will open. There's nothing too fancy in here. You get a couple of hooks, and you can fold the seats from the levers at the back of the boot, so you don't have to run around into the car. There's a 60-40 split fold for the rear seat, and there's not a ton of additional storage outside of the boot itself. It's quite deep and it's quite wide, so it's pretty useful. And if you lift up the boot floor, there's just the tool carrier and a space saver spare, and it doesn't matter what grade of Camry you get, they've all got a space saver to help keep you mobile. Now, while that depth of the boot is pretty handy to have, I want to show you a couple of things. This umbrella is not particularly short and fits in. Easy, no dramas. Now, when it comes to the boot lip, it might not sound like a big deal. It's easy enough to get stuff into, but it drops down a fair way. And when you go to grab stuff out, you'll be dragging it in and over that boot lip. No, it doesn't sound like a big deal, but if it's prams and porta cots or heavy luggage, then over time, this can get really tiring. So it'd be great if that boot lip was a little bit lower, but all of this stuff carries over from before. At the business end of the new Camry, all variants get the same hybrid powertrain. That uses a carryover 2.5 litre naturally aspirated engine that now produces 138 kilowatts. So that's 7 kilowatts more than before. That works in tandem with a new electric motor rated at 100 kilowatts, and previously that was an 88 kilowatt motor. So overall, this system is more powerful, and the combined output is rated at 170 kilowatts. That's 10 kilowatts up on the previous generation Camry. If you've kept track of all those numbers, the other stuff is probably what you'd expect. There's an eCVT automatic transmission, and it drives the front wheels. Calling it a CVT sells it maybe a little bit short. It's actually a really clever power split device, so it can determine how much petrol and electric power you need, or use either one solely, combine them and send them to the front wheels. There's also a new front transaxle assembly, and it is lighter than before, and all of this is in the name of efficiency. So as a driver, you're probably not going to notice, but realistically, it is a good way of showing that Toyota hasn't just sat idle, if you'll pardon the pun. A lot of the evolution of this Camry is under the bonnet, and while it might be made up of carryover components, it's been thoroughly re-engineered to keep fuel consumption down, power up, and refinement as quiet as possible. straight off the bat, I want to get something out of the way. If you've ever been in a Toyota hybrid, you'll probably know that as it does the handover from electric to petrol, it can be kind of gruff. And it's not the most refined or kind of, I guess, premium experience. Now, it might sound like marketing guff, but Toyota's 5th generation hybrid system in this Camry doesn't do that. You'll still hear and feel the petrol engine when it kicks in, but instead of roaring at 3,000 RPM or above like the old hybrid systems used to do, the tip-in is much more gentle, and that comes down to the electric motor being stronger, so it can do more of the heavy lifting. Toyota says that the petrol engine runs a couple of hundred RPM lower under acceleration, and that actually makes a difference. So the electric side is stronger, the petrol side is still there, it's a little bit stronger as well, but overall being able to rely more heavily on the silent half of the system means that the noisy half of the system is now much less noisy, it's much more refined, and it's inescapable that you are going to notice it from time to time, but you are going to notice it a hell of a lot less. While this car sits on a platform that has been seen before and was used under the previous Camry, Toyota's gone through and made the kind of changes that you would expect for a generational update. So the suspension has been revised and the steering has been overhauled. The effect is meant to be both more comfortable and a little bit sharper. Again, these are marketing lines, right? But in reality, this car probably is just a tiny bit more comfortable. The problem is you'd have to drive it back to back with the old Camry to really pick the difference. I don't think anyone's going to be sitting there taking fine notes unless you're a suspension engineer on where this car is different or better. But in saying that, the changes work. It's softer over sharp-edged bumps and over repeated oscillations, does a better job of blotting out the road surface, so the cabin is smoother and quieter overall. Still not perfect, but it does a pretty good job. The steering has been tweaked, and again, this isn't a revolutionary change, it's a minor one, but it tips into corners really nicely. I understand that nobody is buying a Camry to drive it like a hot hatch, but on the other side of the coin, when you're at freeway speeds and just dead ahead, it's not twitchy or nervous, so you get a really nice settled highway drive. But if the roads allow it, and some of the roads that we drove at the launch are actually kind of fun, you can tip this thing into a corner and it responds enthusiastically, which is kind of saying a lot for a car that's meant to be the benchmark of middle ground. Not all of the news with the drive experience is great, and I mean this may vary depending on your opinion, but the braking system has been tweaked. That means that handover that you used to get from the electric regen to the friction braking side of things is now much less noticeable. So as you push the brake harder or come to a complete stop, you don't get that little shunt that you used to get. But the brake pedal has lost almost all feel. So as you squeeze the brakes, you kind of don't really get a sense of what's happening. It's the G-forces pulling you down that tell you how much you're slowing. There's no feedback through the pedal. I'm not the biggest fan of it, but I understand that for a lot of drivers that will be absolutely fine. For all those updates and revisions to refinement, however, there's still a few rough edges. I mean, it's a pretty windy day today, and I can hear a lot of wind rustle from this corner of the car. Whether it's the bottom of the pillar or the mirrors, I'm not really sure, but those two items haven't changed from the earlier car, and they tend to be just a little bit crude. So you hear a bit of wind rustle at, higher speeds, say 80 k's and above, not so noticeable around town. The other thing that stands out, and again, this is more of a freeway problem than it is in the city, but tyre noise is really noticeable in this car. And that probably has a lot to do with the fact that everything else is so much quieter now. You don't hear the engine, and that kind of allows more noise to filter into the cabin. As much as that might sound like something that's inescapable, a lot of EVs do a good job of isolating tyre noise now. So I think Toyota could probably do a better job of, whether it's the tyre choice or the insulation in the wheel wells, of just dulling down that noise on the highway. The best thing about Toyota's hybrid system is that you don't need to work out what to do. It does all that for you. So it decides what is the best combination of electric or petrol power for the driving situation that you're in. There is an EV mode, but it's very limited. It can do low speeds and very short distances, because this thing has realistically only got a tiny battery. There's also 3 driving modes, so you can choose your own adventure a little. but they don't make a world of difference. There's an eco mode, and as you'd expect, it kind of dulls off the throttle response, and it really aims to keep things rolling on electricity rather than letting the petrol engine chime in. There's a normal mode, and it is exactly what it says. It's normal, and this car feels 100% normal to drive. And then there's a sport mode, which doesn't transform the car into a track demon by any means, but it does chip the electric motors in a lot earlier, and you get, I guess, like an EV-like acceleration off the line. This car will kind of punch pretty hard, but realistically it uses more electric power and more petrol power off the line to get you rolling, yet it's still pretty refined, and it's still pretty livable, right? And there's no adaptive suspension or anything like that, so it doesn't get any firmer. Steering gets a touch heavier. I reckon 99% of drivers are probably going to leave it normal and never play around, but if you want to, you can. On the safety side of things, Toyota has updated the Safety Sense systems with a new camera sensor that has a much wider field of view ahead of the vehicle. Autonomous emergency braking can detect cars, motorcycles, pedestrians and cyclists, both day and night. Plus, the intersection intervention can detect the risk of an accident in a wider range of situations. There's adaptive cruise control that's been tweaked to slow down and speed up more gracefully, and curved speed control to adjust the car's speed through sweeping bends. On test, it behaved well at speeds up to 80 kilometres an hour, but at 100 it still felt a bit clumsy and too cautious. There's a driver monitoring camera ahead of the driver that makes sure you're paying attention to what's ahead of you. Some of these systems cry wolf the second you glance away from the road, but in the Camry, you can check your mirrors or look from side to side at an intersection without getting in trouble. If the system detects a driver is unresponsive, it can even slow the vehicle to a stop and activate the hazard lights. All grades come with blind spot monitoring, safe exit alert, a 360-degree camera, 7 airbags, including one between the front seat occupants, dusk sensing headlights with auto high beam, and lane centering with lane departure warning. Safety Body ANCAP has awarded the new Camry a 5-star rating, and it rated it at 97% for adult occupant protection. And this is the highest result achieved by any car under the latest assessment criteria. Okay, now the big question mark over the Camry Hybrid is, how much will it cost to run? Toyota provides cap price servicing at $255 per service for the first 5 years at 12-month or 15,000 kilometre intervals. The car comes with a 5-year warranty, and for private buyers, if you keep it serviced to Toyota's schedule, you can get up to 7 years powertrain warranty and up to 10 years hybrid battery warranty if you keep up with what Toyota calls annual hybrid health checks. Cars used commercially, like rideshare or delivery services, are capped at 5 years or 160,000 kilometres for all systems. Against Toyota's official 4 litre per 100 kilometre fuel consumption claim, I came very close in my time with the car, averaging 4.5 litres per 100 kilometres in a mix of urban traffic and flowing open road driving. On some of the more demanding uphill sections of the launch drive, consumption climbed to 5.3 litres per 100 kilometres. And I have to say, for a big car, that's still very impressive. Now, if you like what you've seen here today, or you want to try your hand at snagging a great deal on a second-hand Camry, head over to Drive.com.au/marketplace and you can browse hundreds of new and near-new car listings from our hand-picked dealer partners. Now, Toyota's claims of this as a new generation car are a bit of a stretch. So as we've seen, there's a lot of elements that are shared with the outgoing model. None of those are necessarily a bad thing, and it's kind of a sign of the times. As car makers split their development budgets between all new EV platforms and continuing to offer hybrid and internal combustion cars, this kind of evolution of a platform is the sort of thing that we're going to see. But in this instance, I think Toyota's done a pretty good job. The base that they were starting from was already solid. The new specification levels tell a story here. This is a car that is favoured by fleets, rideshare operators and taxi drivers, and we've always known that. But this SL variant is very heavily skewed towards the kind of features that private buyers expect to buy, and it comes across pretty good. You can buy a sedan like this and still have space and comfort for your family without needing to move up to an SUV. And look, this car, as it stands, works really well. I'm a big fan of Toyota's changes or evolution to the hybrid system. It's quieter and smoother, and it's all of the things that we used to level criticism at before. I'm not such a huge fan of the design changes. I mean, the new front and rear styling look great. Those changes to the rear door though, well, I'm still feeling it, and I do every time I jump into the back seat. But this is probably worth trying on to see if it works for you. But as always, I want to hear from you. Let me know what you think of the new Camry. Let me know what you would have done different if you were in charge of design. And if you've got any questions, drop those in the comments and I will do my best to get back to you. If you're still on the fence about the Toyota Camry Hybrid, it's not the only mid-size hybrid sedan that you can buy. Tung has done a really great in-depth review of the Honda Accord Hybrid. And if you want to check that video out, it's linked right here. Go ahead, click on that, compare the two side by side and see which one you prefer.